Another thing that I hear people bring up, an argument against the creation story, is that there's two creation stories. We see Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2, and that they conflict in some way. Can you talk a little bit about why there are two, if there's a reason or thought behind that, and then how you see those two stories and two narratives interacting with each other?
Yeah, so obviously there are two creation accounts. They're very different from each other. So it's part of, so I'm not a specialist in source criticism of the Pentateuch. But so this is part of the idea that you have different sources, different documents. I would just want to draw the attention to a point which is sometimes overlooked, that the very idea, the documentary hypothesis, originated in the 19th century in Germany. So far before we really knew a lot about ancient Near Eastern literature and writing habits, etc. So we should be very cautious in just clinging to these ideas, and it's it's a speculation. Yeah, we don't have any proofs of these different sources. If you just take the texts as they stand, yeah, they are different. For sure, different style, I would say, even different literary genre. They have a different topic, and I think this is why, or a slightly different topic. This is why I think there are differences, and these differences are only contradictions if you read them in a kind of very literalistic way. So Genesis 1 is really a very broad, say, picture of creation. Really, it sets the great scene. It's kind of the opening, like an opening of an opera. So the overture. Yeah.
Okay.
For the whole Bible, I would say. And then Genesis 2 is, in fact, Genesis 2 goes with Genesis 3. There's obviously the same story continued.
Yeah.
So this is about the creation of humanity and the rebellion against God. So then, obviously, the question is, what is the literature genre of this story? And then your interpretation depends on this. But you have to recognize that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3 are different, I think, literary genres. And especially Genesis 1 is a highly well-crafted piece of art. It's not really poetry, because it's not the Hebrew poetry. In Hebrew you get these parallel verses, so which we know from Proverbs or Psalms. So that is not the case of Genesis 1, but it's a highly crafted text. You can make word accounts, and it all fits very nicely. And so so you have to read this in a certain way. And then Genesis 2 and 3 are kind of, sometimes I compare it to these naive paintings. I don't know, is it the same word in American? So this naive style of paintings, where you first get the impression that the painter don't know how to do a better job, and does a very naive, in fact, drawing. But it's part of the style. And so Genesis 2 and 3, I would say, is something like this. It's a kind of naive painting.
Okay.
But in fact, it's not because the author doesn't know how to do better, because this is just part of the message, and it really brings over very powerfully, very important theological insights.
Yes, yeah, that's helpful. I'm thinking of it now, and you can correct me, but almost like Genesis 1 is the opening. It's getting your attention. It's a big, the big picture, and then we're kind of getting into the more of the narrative and the details in 2 and 3, but there's obviously some repetition there because it's telling some of the same things over. Is that a good way to think of it?
Yeah, and there is even a very important textual clue to it, because there is a transition phrase between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. In fact, the first creation account goes to Genesis 2 verse 3. And then the second creation account starts at verse 4. So when you say Genesis 1, Genesis 2, in fact, we are talking about Genesis 1 up and the first 3 verses of Genesis 2. And in Genesis 2, verse 3, so you have, I just need to check. No, it's so you have verse 4, which is I think the opening phrase of the second account. You have the order, the heaven and the earth. And then in the second half of the verse, it's reversed. It's the earth and the heaven. So it's the time when God made the earth and the heaven. And this changed order shows that now we're focusing, in fact, on the earth, and we focus on humanity. And so you get much more detail on the creation of humanity, much more detail on the difference between man and woman. So you had this already in Genesis 1, man and woman, but now we're getting much more detail on this. And so it's intentional that you get a second account and with a different focus.
Yeah, that's really cool. I had not picked up on that. That's a very, very helpful transition.